I put up a warning sign on my land. Then the HOA accused me of trespassing and called police. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today's story is filled with unexpected twists, powerful emotions, and a shocking truth that no one saw coming. What begins as an ordinary situation will quickly turn into a dramatic confrontation, forcing the characters to make choices that could change their lives forever. Make sure you stay with us until the very end, because the final outcome may completely surprise you. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our latest stories. Your support helps us continue creating more emotional, meaningful, and unforgettable videos for you. We would also love to hear from you. What time is it where you are watching right now, and which city or country are you watching from? Please share your answer in the comments below. It is always wonderful to see viewers joining us from different parts of the world. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin today's story. Put the hammer down and step away from the sign. The voice came from behind me, calm but sharp enough to freeze my arm halfway through the swing. The last strike never landed. My fingers tightened around the worn hickory handle as red and blue light washed across the wet grass, the steel sign, and the orange survey stake beside my boot. Private property. No HOA access. 5 words, for bolts, 1 piece of galvanized steel, and somehow Darlene Whitcomb had convinced the police it was evidence of a crime. I slowly set the hammer in the dirt and raised my hands. The morning air smelled like pine needles, cold mud, and exhaust from the patrol car idling 20 feet behind me. Officer Luke Brennan stood near the open driver's door, one hand resting beside his radio. He wasn't pointing anything at me, but his posture made the situation clear. Nobody was leaving until he understood who owned the ground beneath our feet. Darlene stood 10 yards behind him in a cream-colored windbreaker, gripping her phone like she had personally delivered justice to Briar Glen. Her silver SUV blocked the gravel road, and 2 HOA board members watched from a golf cart behind her. "That's him," she said. "He came back again after we warned him. He's putting unauthorized signs on community property." I looked down at the orange stake. Something about it bothered me more than the accusation. I had placed that marker myself 3 days earlier using the coordinates from my father's original survey. It should have been aligned with the old cedar post near the drainage ditch. Instead, it sat 26 feet west, close enough to make my private road appear inside the HOA's so-called greenbelt. Someone had moved it. Not bumped it. Not loosened it by accident. Moved it carefully, then pressed the soil flat around the base. Darlene's perfume drifted through the damp air, sweet and chemical, fighting with the smell of crushed grass. "Sir," Officer Brennan said, "do you have identification?" "Back pocket," I said. "My name is Caleb Mercer. This is my land." Darlene gave a small laugh behind him. Not loud, just enough to show she had been waiting to hear me say it. "He keeps claiming that," she said. "The county map shows this parcel belongs to Briar Glen. We've maintained it for years." I handed Brennan my license. He studied it, then glanced toward the weathered workshop beyond the trees. That building had belonged to my father. So had the road, the drainage ditch, and every foot of ground Darlene was standing on. I could still smell machine oil when I opened that workshop door. I could still hear Dad telling me that property lines were like promises. They only mattered when someone tried to erase them. Brennan entered my name into his computer. Darlene stepped closer, her shoes sinking slightly into the mud. "I want him removed," she said. "And I want that sign taken down." I stared at the shifted survey stake and felt the truth settle into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had changed the boundary before Darlene called the police. What she didn't know was that moving a certified survey marker didn't weaken my claim. It created evidence, and she had just invited a uniformed witness to stand beside it. Officer Brennan looked from my license to the workshop, then back to Darlene. His expression changed just enough for me to notice. Not trust. Not yet. More like hesitation. The kind that appears when a simple complaint stops fitting neatly inside a police report. He asked everyone to remain where they were while he checked the county records. Darlene folded her arms and stared at me as though patience itself belonged to the homeowners association. I said nothing. I watched the breeze push beads of rain down the face of the sign and tried to remember exactly when this had stopped being a quiet homecoming. 6 weeks earlier, I had driven through the rusted north gate with everything I owned packed into the bed of my truck. The gravel crackled under the tires the same way it had when I was 16 and borrowing Dad's Ford without permission. The property covered 18 acres of pine, scrub oak, and open meadow on the eastern edge of Briar Glen. It was not polished land. The fences leaned. The workshop roof needed patching. Weeds had swallowed the old tractor path, but every crooked post carried my father's fingerprints. Walter Mercer had bought the place in 1986 after 27 years maintaining county road equipment. He trusted steel, measurements, and records that could survive longer than people. When he died, the attorney handed me a brass key, a thick deed packet, and a sentence I did not understand until later. Your father was very particular about the eastern boundary. The first afternoon back, I opened the workshop and the smell stopped me in the doorway. Cedar dust, machine oil, cold iron, and the faint bitterness of coffee that had dried inside an enamel mug years earlier. Dad's tools still hung in careful rows above the bench, wrenches from smallest to largest. Survey tape coiled on a wooden peg. A carpenter's level polished smooth where his hands had carried it. I had spent 15 years surveying road projects across 3 states, but standing there made me feel like a kid again, waiting for him to point at something I had measured wrong. I found his property map folded beneath a stack of equipment manuals. A red line traced the private access road from the county highway to the lake. Near the eastern edge, he had written 6 words in block letters. Never let them move the east marker. I thought it was just Dad being cautious. Then I heard engines outside. 3 all-terrain vehicles rolled past the workshop, their tires throwing gravel against the siding. 4 teenagers in Briar Glen sweatshirts headed toward the lake without slowing down. Behind them came a golf cart carrying coolers, folding chairs, and a bright blue banner that read Community Lake Day. I stepped into the road and raised one hand. The driver barely tapped the brake. "This is private property," I called. He pointed toward a small wooden plaque nailed to one of my fence posts. Briar Glen Nature Access. The screws were new. The wood still smelled freshly cut. By sunset, I had counted 14 vehicles, 2 bags of trash, and a fire pit dug 20 feet from Dad's tree line. That was when I decided to put up the first sign. I still believed a clear boundary would solve the problem. I had not met Darlene Whitcomb yet. She arrived the next morning at 8:15 in a white sport utility vehicle that looked freshly detailed despite the rain. The tires whispered over the gravel, too smooth and too confident for a road she did not own. She parked beside the workshop, stepped out in a pale blue coat, and surveyed the property with the expression of someone inspecting a room she had already decided to remodel. Her name was Darlene Whitcomb, president of the Briar Glen Homeowners Association, and she introduced herself without offering her hand. "You must be Walter's son," she said. Her voice carried that polished warmth people use when they want control to sound like courtesy. I told her my name was Caleb Mercer and asked why residents were crossing my land. She smiled toward the lake. "That access has served the community for years." I pointed to the new wooden plaque nailed to my fence post. "Who authorized that?" Her eyes moved to it, then back to me. "The board did." I asked to see the easement. The smile remained, but the temperature behind it dropped. "Your father understood the arrangement. Then there should be paperwork." The wind pushed the smell of wet pine between us. Somewhere behind the workshop, water dripped steadily from a broken gutter into a steel bucket. Darlene glanced at the folded survey map in my hand and told me old documents often failed to reflect modern planning. That phrase stayed with me. Modern planning. Not ownership. Not permission. Planning. She invited me to the Briar Glen office that afternoon to clear up what she called an unfortunate misunderstanding. The office occupied a converted sales center near the subdivision entrance, all gray stone, trimmed hedges, and framed photographs of smiling families beside artificial ponds. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive coffee. On the far wall hung a rendering almost 8 feet wide. Briar Glen Lakeside Expansion. 12 new homes curved around the western shore, each one advertised with private lake access and premium woodland views. A bright green line marked the only road leading in. My road. Howard Pike stood beneath the rendering with a silver pen in one hand and a folder of purchase agreements in the other. He was Darlene's vice president and, according to the gold lettering on his office door, a licensed real estate broker. He shook my hand too firmly and called me Cal, though nobody who knew me used that name. "Exciting growth," he said. This whole corridor is about to become the most valuable section of Briar Glen. I moved closer to the map. My workshop was gone. My eastern meadow had been colored green and labeled Community Preserve. The private road my father had built was renamed Lakeside Drive. "You are advertising access across my property," I said. Howard gave Darlene a quick look. She opened a leather folder and slid a single-page agreement across the conference table. It offered me associate membership in the Homeowners Association, relief from future maintenance assessments, and a modest annual payment in exchange for recognizing existing community use. The document did not ask for permission. It asked me to surrender the argument. "Your father agreed verbally years ago," Darlene said. "Signing this simply brings the records up to date." I read every line. Buried near the bottom was a permanent transfer of access rights, broad enough to cover construction vehicles, utility crews, future residents, and any development approved by the board. I set the pen down. "No." Howard's pleasant expression tightened. Darlene leaned back and studied me as if I had failed a test she expected me to pass. "You should think carefully," she said. "Once a community has relied on an access route long enough, ownership can become complicated." I folded the paper once and slid it back toward her. "Not when the owner never agreed." Her smile disappeared. Behind her, the rendering showed 12 houses that had already been sold in someone else's imagination. That was when I understood the truth. They were not using my road because they thought it belonged to them. They needed it to belong to them because they had already started selling what lay beyond it. The first notice appeared on my workshop door the following morning, sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve and fastened with 2 pieces of blue painter's tape. The paper was thick, bright white, and still warm from the printer. "Unauthorized obstruction of community access," it read across the top. "A $500 daily fine would begin unless I removed all signs, barriers, and personal equipment from what the Homeowners Association called shared property." I read it twice while rain tapped against the metal roof. Then I photographed it, logged the date, and placed it inside a folder on Dad's workbench. By noon, the wooden plaque I had removed from my fence post was back in place. Someone had used longer screws. That afternoon, I installed a motion camera under the workshop eave and positioned it toward the road. I did not hide it. I wanted anyone who came onto the property to see the red indicator light. 2 nights later, the camera sent an alert at 1:43 in the morning. A golf cart rolled into view with its headlights off. Howard stepped down wearing a dark rain jacket, followed by a maintenance worker carrying a cordless drill. They removed my first metal sign, loaded it into the cart, and replaced it with another Briar Glen access marker. Howard looked directly at the camera before leaving. The next envelope arrived by certified mail. It accused me of harassment, visual blight, and interference with community recreation. The fine had increased to $750 per day. Darlene also posted a warning on the neighborhood website claiming an unidentified man was confronting families near the lake. She never used my name, but she included a photograph of my truck. Within hours, residents began slowing down outside the workshop to stare. A woman walking 2 golden retrievers raised her phone and recorded me stacking firewood. A man in a golf shirt asked whether I had permission to be there. I told him I owned the land. He laughed as though I had made a joke. The next escalation came on a Friday morning. I heard the scrape of lumber before I saw the crew. For workers were building a gate across the road 50 yards from my workshop. Cedar posts had already been sunk into fresh concrete. A keypad box stood beside a black iron frame, and a sign announced resident access only. I walked to the foreman and asked who had ordered the work. He showed me a signed authorization from Howard Pike. The property description listed Briar Glen Common Area. I pointed toward the workshop. "That road is the only vehicle access to my building." The foreman shrugged and said he had permits. I asked to see them. He looked away. By sunset, the gate was locked. I returned with the deed packet, my survey equipment, and the original brass key to the old chain barrier Dad had installed decades earlier. The new padlock did not belong there. I cut it, opened the gate, and drove through slowly. Darlene was waiting near the lake with her phone already raised. "You are destroying community property," she said. Her voice carried across the water, sharp and rehearsed. I told her to step off my road. She moved closer instead, keeping the camera on my face. "You have been warned repeatedly. This is your final opportunity to leave peacefully." Behind her, Howard stood beside 2 prospective buyers and pretended not to listen. I could smell fresh asphalt from a test strip near the proposed construction site. Survey flags marked future driveways in the meadow. They were moving faster now. So was I? I held up the lock I had. Removed. You blocked access to my workshop. Darlene lowered her phone just enough to smile. Your workshop is inside the preserve. You should not be using it. Then she dialed 3 numbers and turned the speaker on. She reported a hostile trespasser damaging a secure gate. She gave my description, my truck color, and my exact location. By the time the dispatcher finished asking questions, I understood what she was building. Every notice, every photograph, every call created another official record with the same false story. She did not need to prove the land belonged to the homeowners association today. She only needed enough paperwork to make everyone else assume it did. The patrol car arrived 7 minutes later, tires crunching over the gravel with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Officer Luke Brennan stepped out, glanced at Darlene, then at the cut lock in my hand. She began talking before he reached us. According to her, I had ignored repeated warnings, forced entry through a secured community gate, threatened residents, and damaged homeowners association property. Her version came out smooth, complete, and polished enough to sound rehearsed. Brennan asked me to place the lock on the ground. I did. Then I handed him my driver's license and a copy of the deed I had started carrying everywhere. The paper felt dry and stiff between my fingers. He read the first page, looked toward the workshop, and asked where the parcel boundary was supposed to be. I pointed east toward the cedar post and the drainage ditch. Darlene immediately opened a map on her phone. The county geographic information system showed the road, the meadow, and the workshop inside a shaded area labeled Briar Glen Community Preserve. Brennan studied both documents, his jaw tightening slightly. These do not match, he said. The deed is recorded, I told him. That online map was changed. Darlene gave a quiet sigh, as if she were watching someone resist obvious facts. Officer, he has been told this repeatedly. His father may have owned part of the land decades ago, but the association has maintained and controlled this corridor for years. I asked her to produce the transfer document. She turned toward Brennan instead of answering me. That was the first time he looked at her with real doubt. Still, he had a live property dispute, conflicting records, and 2 people claiming the same ground. He told me I would not be arrested that day, but I needed to avoid the road until ownership could be verified. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I feared losing the argument. Because a stranger was telling me to stay away from my father's workshop while Darlene stood on the road he had paid to build. I looked past Brennan at the iron gate, the fresh concrete, and the new keypad gleaming in the afternoon light. Howard had already returned to the buyers. One of them held a brochure showing a lakefront house that did not exist yet. Darlene smiled as though the matter had been settled. I drove out through the North Trail, a narrow route that crossed the back meadow and connected to an old logging lane. Branches scraped along the sides of my truck. Wet leaves slapped the windshield. By the time I reached the county road, the first photographs were already online. The caption described me as an aggressive trespasser removed from protected community land. The following morning, a letter from Briar Glen's attorney arrived. It demanded that I surrender every key, camera, sign, and piece of equipment located within the preserve. A second envelope came from my bank. The Homeowners Association had filed a preliminary claim against the house for unpaid fines and maintenance assessments. The amount was $38,400. I spread the documents across Dad's workbench and listened to the fluorescent light hum overhead. Every page told the same lie in a different font. Then I opened the county map on my laptop and checked the revision history. Most people would have ignored the date in the lower corner. I had spent 15 years reading survey files, so I noticed it immediately. The parcel layer had been updated at 9:22 in the morning on March 14th, exactly 2 days after Dad entered the hospital for the final time. I enlarged the metadata until the numbers filled the screen. My coffee cooled. Beside the keyboard, the workshop smelled like dust, oil, and rain leaking through the roof. Someone had not simply misunderstood an old boundary. Someone had waited until my father could no longer defend it, then changed the map. I started with the floor because Dad never hid anything where a thief would look first. He believed the safest place in a workshop was beneath the thing too heavy to move casually. The old steel workbench weighed nearly 400 pounds and had not shifted since I was in high school. I cleared the tools, rolled a hydraulic jack beneath one corner, and raised it just enough to expose a narrow seam between two floorboards. The wood smelled damp and ancient. One plank had a brass screw instead of a nail. I removed it with Dad's flathead screwdriver, lifted the board, and found a gray metal box wrapped in oilcloth. The latch opened with the same brass key the attorney had given me. Inside were 30 years of answers. The original survey sat on top, folded along soft white creases, with the eastern boundary marked in red pencil. Beneath it were receipts for gravel, drainage pipe, and grading work Dad had paid for in 1987. There were photographs of him beside every boundary marker, younger than I remembered, standing in work boots with a measuring rod in one hand. The orange stake near the drainage ditch appeared in 3 separate pictures, aligned exactly where I had placed it before someone moved it. I kept digging. A certified letter from Darlene was clipped to a property appraisal from 4 years earlier. She had offered Dad $40,000 for permanent access across the road. His answer was written across the bottom in blue ink. Not for sale. The page shook slightly in my hand, though the workshop air was still. Darlene had not inherited a misunderstanding. She had inherited a refusal. Under the letter was a draft easement prepared by a local attorney. Dad had considered allowing limited pedestrian access to the lake, but the document was never signed, never notarized, and never recorded. A yellow note was attached to the front. Access only if they leave the road private. Any development ends the offer. That sentence changed everything. I called Rachel Sloan, a property attorney whose name appeared on the deed packet. She arrived before sunset in a dark green sedan with mud already dried along the wheel wells. Rachel was in her 40s, direct, and carried a leather case that looked older than either of us. She spread the documents across the bench and read in silence while rain ticked against the roof. When she reached Darlene's purchase offer, she stopped. "This proves prior knowledge," she said. "She knew your father owned the road." Then she compared the unsigned easement with the map currently filed by the Homeowners Association. The association's version used nearly identical language, but the signature page had been replaced. Dad's name appeared at the bottom in a slanted script I had never seen. Rachel held both papers beneath the desk lamp. "This signature is not his." I already knew. Dad printed everything, even birthday cards. His hands had been too stiff from years of mechanical work for decorative handwriting. Rachel photographed each document, then called the county recorder and requested the filing history. While she waited, I examined the metal box again. A small envelope was taped beneath the lid. Inside was a flash drive labeled East Line in Dad's block letters. The files contained scanned surveys, dated photographs, and voice recordings. In the final recording, Dad sounded tired, but clear. He said Darlene and Howard had returned twice after he refused to sell. They told him the development would move forward with or without his cooperation. Then he said something that made the fluorescent light above me seem to buzz louder. "Caleb, if that map changes after I am gone, check who filed it. The road is the only thing standing between them and 12 houses they cannot reach." Rachel looked up from her phone. The altered map had been submitted electronically by Howard Pike using credentials assigned to a retired county planning employee. The upload time matched the date on my screen. We now had the original boundary, proof of ownership, evidence of prior knowledge, a suspected forged signature, and the name attached to the false filing. For the first time since Darlene called the police, I felt the ground beneath me stop moving. She had built her entire story on paper. Dad had left me better paper. Rachel told me not to confront them. People who alter records usually make their biggest mistake after they think the records have protected them, she said. So I stopped arguing. I stopped answering Darlene's messages. I stopped explaining myself to neighbors who slowed down to stare. Instead, I hired a licensed survey crew from 2 counties away, far enough that nobody had business ties to Howard. They arrived before sunrise on Monday with tripods, global positioning receivers, steel caps, and orange flags stacked in the back of a white utility truck. The air smelled like wet clay and gasoline. Their boots pressed dark prints into the meadow as they worked from the original coordinates, not the county's altered digital layer. By noon, the truth had returned to the ground. My eastern boundary ran 26 feet farther east than Darlene's map claimed. The private road, the workshop, and every proposed driveway on the expansion plan sat entirely inside my parcel. The crew replaced the disturbed marker with a steel monument set below grade, and fitted with a coded identification tag. They installed 3 more along the road, each photographed, measured, and logged with exact coordinates. I stood beside the cedar post while the lead surveyor handed me the signed field report. The paper smelled faintly of toner and rain. "Anyone moves these now," he said. "They cannot call it confusion." Rachel prepared formal notices that afternoon. One went to Darlene, one to Howard, one to every board member. Copies went to the county recorder, the planning department, the title insurance company, the construction lender, and the families who had placed deposits on the 12 proposed homes. The language was simple. Ownership disputed. Access not granted. Construction prohibited. All entry documented. I mounted a new sign at the gate using 4 tamper-resistant bolts. It did not threaten anyone. It did not mention fines. It stated the parcel number, the recording reference, and one sentence in black letters large enough to read from the road. Notice of disputed access. All entry recorded. I installed 2 cameras in plain view and a third inside a hollow birdhouse facing the eastern marker. A sensor beneath the steel monument would send an alert if it moved more than half an inch. Dad had taught me that a good warning did 2 things. It gave honest people a chance to stop and dishonest people a chance to identify themselves. Darlene received her notice at 10:12 Tuesday morning. At 10:19, she called me. I let it ring. At 10:27, Howard sent an email calling the survey fraudulent. Rachel answered with the surveyor's license number and the county recording receipt. At 11:05, the Briar Glen website announced an emergency board meeting. Martha Keene, an elderly widow whose property bordered my north meadow, attended and called me afterward. She had lived there before Briar Glen had gates, fountains, or matching mailboxes. Her voice was low. "Darlene held your letter up in front of everyone," she said. Then she tore it in half and said the expansion would proceed on schedule. I asked whether Howard was there. Yes. He said once the road was paved, no judge would make them remove it. That sentence told me they were running out of time. The lender had scheduled a site inspection for Friday. The public groundbreaking was set for Saturday morning. If Darlene could show active construction and uninterrupted access, she might keep the money moving long enough to bury the dispute under contracts and concrete. Thursday evening, a flatbed truck delivered barricades and paving equipment near the new gate. Fresh diesel fumes drifted across the meadow. I checked every camera, tested every sensor, and returned to the workshop before dark. Rain began after midnight, soft at first, then steady enough to blur the windows. At 2:18 in the morning, my phone vibrated against the workbench. East marker movement detected. I opened the live feed. 3 figures stood beside my sign under the pale wash of work lights. Darlene held an umbrella. Howard carried a metal pry bar. Behind them, the same maintenance worker from the first camera recording started removing the for bolts. Darlene looked toward the road and said, "Get everything out before morning. Once the pavement is down, Mercer cannot prove where the line was." The microphone caught every word. Howard pulled the steel marker free and placed it in the back of the golf cart. The location sensor kept transmitting as they drove away. I watched the blinking dot cross my property, pass through the Briar Glen gate, and stop behind the Homeowners Association office. Then I called Rachel. She answered on the second ring. "They moved it," I said. She was silent for one breath. "Good," she replied. "Now do not touch anything. They just turned your boundary dispute into evidence." By 6:30 Friday morning, the rain had stopped, but the road still shone black beneath a low gray sky. Rachel met me at the workshop with 2 sealed evidence bags, a portable hard drive, and a county investigator named Marcus Bell. He wore a tan field jacket and spoke in the calm, careful tone of someone who preferred facts to arguments. We walked the property line while the wet grass brushed against our boots. I showed him the empty socket where the steel marker had been set, the camera angles, the sensor log, and the live location history that ended behind the Briar Glen office. He watched the recording twice. The first time, he listened to Darlene. The second time, he focused on Howard. "Once the pavement is down, Mercer cannot prove where the line was." Marcus paused the video and looked at Rachel. "That statement matters." By 8, the county recorder had frozen all pending changes connected to the parcel. The title insurer suspended coverage on the 12 proposed homes. The construction lender canceled its inspection and requested every document Howard had submitted. Still, Rachel told me not to celebrate. "They do not know how much we have yet. she said. Let them keep talking. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, almost insultingly pleasant. Blue banners lined the entrance to the proposed expansion. Folding chairs faced a temporary stage near the lake. A polished sign displayed drawings of 12 luxury homes with private woodland access. The smell of fresh coffee, cut grass, and new asphalt drifted across the meadow. Darlene stood at the microphone in a white jacket, smiling for a local photographer. Howard moved between prospective buyers, shaking hands and promising construction dates. A paving crew waited beside 2 trucks near my road. I parked at the North Trail and walked in with Rachel. Nobody stopped us. They were too busy pretending the dispute had disappeared. Darlene saw me as she began her speech. Her smile tightened, but she continued. She talked about responsible growth, shared values, and the future of Briar Glen. Behind her, the lake reflected the stage like polished glass. Then 3 county vehicles turned onto the gravel road. A patrol car followed. The crowd shifted in their chairs. Engines idled. Doors opened. Marcus Bell stepped out first, carrying a folder sealed with red evidence tape. Officer Luke Brennan emerged from the patrol car behind him. This time, he did not approach me. He walked directly toward the stage. Darlene lowered the microphone. "Can I help you, officer?" Brennan's face gave nothing away. "Darlene Wickham, this event needs to stop. County investigators are executing a search warrant at the Briar Glen office." The meadow went silent except for the soft ticking of the cooling pavement equipment. Howard stepped backward, then looked toward the parking lot. Marcus held up a photograph of the missing steel marker. "We recovered this behind your office 20 minutes ago," he said. "Its tracking device led us there." Darlene glanced at Howard. He immediately pointed toward the maintenance crew. "They handle field operations. I do not supervise every detail." Rachel opened her case and handed Marcus copies of the purchase offer, the forged easement, the altered map history, and Dad's recorded warning. One document after another crossed into his hands. The buyers began whispering. A woman near the front asked whether her deposit was safe. Another man held up a brochure and demanded to know whether the homes had legal road access. Howard tried to answer, but Rachel spoke first. "They do not." The words traveled farther than Darlene's microphone had. The lender's representative closed his folder and walked away without shaking anyone's hand. The paving foreman shut down both trucks. Officer Brennan turned toward Darlene and explained that she was being detained for questioning related to falsified property records, unlawful removal of certified survey monuments, and suspected real estate fraud. No shouting. No dramatic scene. Just the quiet click of procedure replacing the noise of authority. As Brennan guided her away from the stage, Darlene looked at me for the first time without a smile. Behind her, the banner for Lakeside expansion lifted in the wind, tore loose from one corner, and folded over the artist's rendering. 12 perfect houses disappeared beneath a sheet of white vinyl. The road remained exactly where Dad had left it. The county investigation lasted 4 months, but the road changed before the paperwork did. The black iron gate came down first. A crew hired by the title insurer removed it on a cold Monday morning while I stood beside the workshop holding Dad's brass key. The concrete around the posts cracked under the saw, and the smell of wet cement mixed with pine sap in the air. By noon, the gravel entrance was open again. No keypad, no resident access sign, no claim pretending my father's road belonged to anyone else. The altered county map was corrected the following week. My parcel line moved 26 feet east on every official record, exactly where the original survey said it had always been. Howard Pike surrendered his real estate license after investigators traced the false filing, the forged easement, and the expansion deposits back to his office. Darlene resigned before the Homeowners Association could remove her, but resignation did not erase the evidence. She faced criminal charges connected to falsified records and the unlawful removal of certified survey markers. The civil case cost her far more than the road had ever been worth. The association's insurer paid restitution to the buyers, reimbursed my legal fees, and withdrew every fine and claim filed against my property. The $38,400 lien vanished from the bank record with one stamped order. I kept a copy in Dad's metal box. The 12 proposed homes were never built. Without my road, the project had no legal vehicle access, no construction approval, and no title coverage. For several weeks, Bright orange survey flags remained scattered across the meadow like reminders of a future that had existed only in brochures. Then the wind took most of them. I removed the rest by hand. Briar Glen held a new election that spring. Martha Keene became the temporary board chair, despite insisting she was too old for neighborhood politics. She opened the financial records, posted meeting minutes online, and required every property decision to include a recorded vote. The first resolution she brought to me was a request for limited lake access for current residents. Rachel expected me to refuse. I had every legal right to close the road, install a private gate, and make the entire neighborhood turn around. But most of those families had not moved survey markers or forged signatures. They had trusted people who spoke confidently and printed lies on official letterhead. I granted a narrow access agreement for walking and bicycles during daylight hours. No construction vehicles, no commercial development, no association fees, no permanent transfer. Every condition fit on 2 pages, and every signature was witnessed, notarized, and recorded. Dad would have approved of that part. He never hated neighbors. He hated people who treated kindness like surrender. Officer Brennan returned the original steel sign after the case closed. The evidence sticker still clung to the back, and one corner was bent where Howard had forced it loose. Brennan set it on the workbench and apologized for asking me to leave my own land. I told him he had walked into a story Darlene had spent months manufacturing. He nodded toward the corrected survey map on the wall. Good thing you kept records. I looked at Dad's old toolbox, the brass key, and the gray metal box beneath the floor. Good thing he did. I mounted the damage sign beside the workshop door instead of putting it back on the road. The new boundary markers were enough. Some mornings, I still hear bicycle tires rolling over the gravel and neighbors calling hello on their way to the lake. The sound does not bother me anymore. The road is quiet, but it is not empty. It belongs to me, and access happens with permission now. Darlene once believed authority came from speaking first, calling the police, and placing her name on enough documents. She was wrong. Authority came from the deed, the coordinates, the signature, and the patience to let every false claim collapse beneath its own weight. Justice never raised its voice on my property. It simply corrected the line and made everyone stand on the right side of it.